Good morning, and welcome once again to PB Reads. Good to have you with me this morning. I am PB. I'm Pastor Brian. I'm pastor here at the Christ United Methodist Church in Waynesboro, Pennsylvania, which sits right on the border between Pennsylvania and Maryland, just north of that edge by only a couple miles. As the crow flies, possibly even closer than that. But yeah, so it's good to have you with me this morning. Great to be here as well. Excuse me, I'm going to take a sip of coffee from my amazing coffee mug. That was one of my Christmas presents from my secretary. Really enjoy that. I was only going to have one cup of coffee this morning, but I felt I needed a second one, especially since I was doing more videos today. Because yes, well, for me today is Wednesday. For you, today is Thursday. That's when this video is going to be uploaded anyway, for Thursday morning. As I said, I'll be unable to do this one live because I have other things I have to be at today. Something else I have to be at today. So, but today is day 27. PB Reads Acts, a chapter a day, number 27. That's what we're on. We're almost done. We're this close, folks. We're this close. We're got today and tomorrow. Friday will be the last day of Acts, the last of Acts. We'll wrap it up, and I am planning on that one being live right here on Facebook at 9 a.m. I look forward to seeing you there. Now, just because this one isn't live doesn't mean you can't leave a comment on the video. Excuse me. Letting me know who watched it, which is always cool, and also leaving comments or questions, which I am more than happy to get back to you on. I've been just so pleased and overwhelmed and humbled that people have sent me questions and looking for added clarity that apparently I've helped in some ways, but I've also I've also said things that have intrigued you and made you think. Oh, imagine that. And so you needed some help for additional clarity. That's awesome. I am humbled to think that God is using me in that way. That's great. Anyway, but today is the penultimate chapter. Ultimate would be last. Penultimate means next to last. Okay, so today is the next to last chapter in the book of Acts. If you learned nothing else today, you learned what penultimate means. So, Paul has, just to recap, to catch you up in case you missed any of the videos and haven't had the chance to watch them yourself, Paul had his trial in Caesarea, multiple trials. He spent 2 years, more than 2 years in prison there, has appealed to the emperor. And last when we saw, Agrippa and Festus agreed. Agrippa said he could have been set free if he hadn't appealed to Caesar. But Paul had appealed to Caesar for judgment, for decision, as part of his mandate, his fate, his DEI, necessity, God-driven necessity, to go to Rome. He knew he had to go to Rome, so he was going to kind of push things. All right, so here we are, chapter 7. When the time came, we set sail for Italy. Pause. Yes, Luke threw in that we. Now, Luke was not in prison with Paul, and he's not going to Rome to be on trial. It was a common practice to speak in like the first person on some stories, especially sailing stories, sailing sagas at the time. However, it would seem that Luke's purpose of using the pronoun we and mentioning that he was there, not just to kind of throw himself into the story, but as a witness. He's putting himself there. He's saying, you know what, I was a witness. I saw Paul's actions. I heard what he said, and I saw what he did. So it would seem that we can take him seriously, that he was on this trip. So when the time came, we set sail for Italy. Paul and several other prisoners were placed in the custody of a Roman officer, centurion, named Julius, a captain of the imperial regiment. Pause. Although, Julius, not a, it would seem that Luke gives him a name just to give him a name. That detail isn't there because he was an important person. He really wasn't. He was just the captain of the guard, and this guard isn't like an important guard. It might sounds it's got a title. They must be important people. No, they're probably soldiers heading home. They're probably soldiers heading home. They've replacements have come in, and they're being allowed to head home to Rome. Head home to Rome. So that's probably what's taking place here. But they're being given added work, being given duty to accomplish on your journey. You guys can go home, but you're taking this guy and a few other prisoners along with him back to Rome with you. Back to Rome with you. Okay. Aristarchus, a Macedonian from Thessalonica, was also with us. We left on a ship whose home port was Adramyttium, on the northwest coast of the province of Asia. It was scheduled to make several stops at ports along the coast of the province. Remember, Asia, when Luke talks about Asia, it's the province, it's not the country. I mean, it's not the continent of Asia, it's the province of Asia. It's part of modern-day Turkey. Part of modern-day Turkey. Was scheduled to make several stops at ports along the coast of the province. So they have left Caesarea and they're traveling north, or at least north-ish, along the coast of the Mediterranean Sea and this province of Asia, Turkey. And then they're going to head west after they get north of Cyprus. Okay. The next day when we docked at Sidon, Julius was very kind to Paul and let him go ashore to visit with friends so they could provide for his needs. Prisoners weren't really taken care of very well. You had to get your supplies from friends and family and stuff like that. So Paul's kind of collecting food and clothing for the rest of his journey and his imprisonment. Putting out to sea from there, we encountered strong headwinds that made it difficult to keep the ship on course. So we sailed north of Cyprus, between the island and the mainland. Keeping to the open sea, we passed along the coast of Cilicia and Pamphylia, landing at Myra, in the province of Lycia. There, the commanding officer found an Egyptian ship from Alexandria that was bound for Italy, and he put us on board. Pause. So Luke is describing a journey that is very plodding in nature. It's very slow moving. Everything seems to be going against them. First, they're on this ship that had to make stops because that's what it was. It was like a ferry. Then they make this stop for Paul's benefit, but really wasn't in the itinerary. This was an added port. This was an added port. So things are going slow, and now they're just facing constant headwinds, even though they're on the north side of the island. And Luke makes specific; they're between the island and the mainland. It should be relatively protected from the wind. They're not in like the open water of the Mediterranean down underneath Cyprus, since they're on the north side. But they're hitting headwinds the whole time, so they're moving very slowly. Very slowly. Now, the reader can anticipate this as sort of a foreshadowing. Something's going to happen. Something's going to happen. This can't be good. This can't be good. This can't be good. And Luke's first century writers or readers would have understood that too. Anybody who knew anything about sailing would know that this isn't good. This isn't good. All right? And they had to get on a different ship because the ship that they were on was probably too small for the open waters, for the full journey to Rome. So they need to get on a different ship. Now they're going to be getting on an Alexandrian ship, a Greek ship, a larger ship, something that could handle things. Okay? Continuing, so verse 7, we had several days of slow sailing, and after great difficulty, we finally neared Cnidus. But the wind was against us, so we sailed across to Crete, and along the sheltered coast of the island, past the Cape of Salmone. We struggled along the coast with great difficulty, and finally arrived at Fair Havens, near the town of Lasea. We had lost a lot of time. The weather was becoming dangerous for sea travel because it was so late in the fall, and Paul spoke to the ship's officers about it. Pause. So, like I said, they've been traveling westward. That's around the northern, well, above Cyprus, between Cyprus and the mainland, and away from the southern part of the Mediterranean. But they had to dip south to come underneath Crete. The north was too dangerous now because the wind was coming from a different direction, and there were a lot of strong northern winds that were coming down. So instead they went to the south. My face is Crete. They come to the south of Crete, and they're landing. They aim for Fair Haven, for a place called Fair Haven, which is small. And it says, this translation says it was late in the fall. In Greek, and many of your other translations may say the fast had already taken place, the fast had gone by, which would have been the fast for the Day of Atonement. So we're talking September, October. That was the big fast in the Jewish. So what Luke is doing by pointing that out is, giving us a relative date, but he's dating things by the Jewish. He's using the Jewish method for dating things, not the Roman, not the secular way. Because that fast was a big fast and very important in Judaism. It was the big one for the year, so to speak. It was the big one for the year. And so we're getting late. We're well into fall. We're well into autumn. And again, Luke makes it very clear how slow this journey is going, how plodding the pace is, and his readers would understand this isn't good. Time of the year isn't good. We know at least a little bit about sailing and sea voyages. That can't be good. This isn't good for you. What are you going to do now? And Paul, we should read what Paul's doing and saying next, not as prophecy, but as just as good advice. Paul's a smart man. Paul is well traveled. If for nothing else, he's been spending the last several years traveling. By the way, we're probably 60 A.D. This is probably taking place around 60 A.D. or CE if you prefer that description. So we're right around 60 when this is taking place. And Paul is a well-traveled individual. He knows what he's doing. He knows what he's talking about. He's observant. Not normally we would say he's an observant Jew because he follows the law so closely. But I'm saying he's observant because he keeps his eyes open. He watches. He notices things. He learns. He learns, and he spent so much time learning things, even though his eyes may not be good. But that's for close up or for reading and stuff like that, possibly. But he knows what's going on. And so this isn't a prophecy so much as a prediction based on experience. And he's trying to offer his experience to Julius, to a Roman soldier who probably does not have that sea voyaging experience in mind and hand. Okay? So he says, verse 10, men, he said, I believe there is trouble ahead if we go on. Shipwreck, loss of cargo, and danger to our lives as well. But the officer in charge of the prisoners listened more to the ship's captain and the owner than to Paul. And since Fair Havens was an exposed harbor, a poor place to spend the winter, most of the crew wanted to go on to Phoenix, farther up the coast of Crete, and spend the winter there. Phoenix was a good harbor with only a southwest and northwest exposure. Pause. So, trying to get your geography right. If you have a map in front of you, that's awesome. If not, just kind of picture it, okay? So, like, my face is Crete, although it should probably be this way. So, Paul and they've made port in Fair Havens, which is down on the southern side, almost directly in the middle of Crete on the south. And at that point, Crete is kind of like a V, kind of like my chin, okay? So they want to go up this way to this place called Phoenix, which is protected by most of the island, by most directions, from most directions. However, it's going to be exposed. It's going to be exposed from the southwest and from the northwest. But the northeast is what they're concerned about. Okay, the winds that come out of the northeast are the ones that are the most dangerous. So this shelter, this port of Phoenix, because of where it's positioned, would be good protection from those winds from the northeast. And that's where they want to get to. Fair Havens isn't as protective from those winds, and it's not a deep enough harbor. It's not a good place for a full wintering, which is what they're kind of looking at now. So everybody's in agreement that we can't stay. Well, I shouldn't say everybody's in agreement. Everybody's in agreement that they're not going to get to Rome right now. Okay. Everybody's in agreement that our timetable for getting to Rome has changed. We're not going to be able to our ETA is going to be off. We're not going to make it in time. We need to do something. Now, Paul is saying, stay here. Stay here. We got to do the best we can and just stay here. But Julius is listening to multiple voices and really can't blame him too much. He is going with majority rule. Now he's listening to good people. He's listening to the captain, who should know what he's doing. He's also listening to the owner of the ship, who should be concerned about his ship, you would think. So he would probably be a good one to listen to. So the majority of people are telling him, we've got to put out from here. We can make it to Phoenix. We've got to do it. Okay? Continuing. When a light wind began blowing from the south, that's good news, the sailors thought they could make it. So they pulled up anchor and sailed close to the shore of Crete. But the weather changed abruptly, and a wind of typhoon strength, called a northeaster, burst across the island and blew us out to sea. So that's the direction they were worried about. The sailors couldn't turn the ship into the wind, so they gave up and let it run before the gale. We sailed along the sheltered side of a small island named Cauda, where with great difficulty we hoisted aboard the lifeboat being towed behind us. Then the sailors bound ropes around the hull of the ship to strengthen it. They were afraid of being driven across to the sandbars of Syrtis off the African coast. So they lowered the sea anchor to slow the ship and were driven before the wind. Pause. So the sailors are doing everything they can, and they're kind of following things by the book. They're going in the proper order. Typically, and you might have seen it in some old movies, and especially pirate movies, the lifeboat, the dinghy, is usually just towed along on the back of these old ships. They're not, tied to the side and lowered down when needed. They're really just kind of floating in the water behind you. So what they've done is they don't want to lose that. So to protect it, they've towed it in, towed it up, lifted it up, and they now have it attached to the side of the ship. They've taken very strong ropes, maybe multiple of them, twined them together, and went around the ship. Okay, put them down one side under the keel and up the other side, and tied them together very, very tightly, very, very strongly, as added support for the ship itself to help protect it and try to keep it from being split apart, broken apart by this storm that's just beginning, by this nasty, nasty wind. Okay, when they see that they're getting pushed, they're worried about where they're being pushed, since they're not in control. They throw out an anchor to try to slow it a little bit. The next day, as gale force winds continued to batter the ship, the crew began throwing the cargo overboard. It's the first thing you're going to do is you got to get rid of what you really don't need. Okay, it's the flotsam. You're going to throw that stuff overboard. Flotsam and jetsam. Flotsam and jetsam. One is pieces of the ship and one is cargo. So they're throwing over the cargo to lighten the load, try to get the ship up out of the water a little bit more, so that there's more of it above water. Hopefully it'll just go smoother. That way, less fear about hitting something underneath as well, because you're putting more between you and the ground underneath the water. First thing you do is you throw out the cargo, and that's what they did. The following day, they even took some of the ship's gear and threw it overboard. Pause. So the second thing is you're getting rid of, your translations may say tackle, and that's exactly what that is. The ship's tackle would be gear. So you're talking extra ropes and spurs and all that kind of stuff. Anything having to do with controlling the ship, you're throwing that overboard. We don't need this anymore. We have to continue to lighten our load. Now, what I should point out too, and we're going to really see it soon, noticing the difference, because especially Luke's first readers would hear echoes of the story of Jonah in this, and the immediate contrasts between Paul and Jonah. Okay, Jonah was that reluctant prophet. He's on a ship in danger because he doesn't want to go where God wants him to go. His ship gets into trouble and into a nasty storm because they're going where he's not supposed to go. He's going away from where he's being called. Paul's ship is getting into this nasty storm because he is going to where God is calling him to go, which is interesting, isn't it? And Luke's readers would have picked up on that. So they would have picked up the prophet taking place there, but they would have also picked it up that he's not a prophet like Jonah. He's a prophet like somebody else. And they would have remembered the stories from Luke himself about Jesus's experience on the stormy sea in Galilee, and how he was even able to just relax and be calm and sleep in the middle of that terrible storm. And Paul seems to be fitting this character of a prophet like Jesus. Prophet like Jesus. Not a prophet like Jonah, but a prophet like Jesus. Yes. Where were we? 20. Verse 20. The terrible storm raged for many days, blotting out the sun and the stars until at last all hope was gone. Pause. This translation doesn't pick up quite so well on as the NRSV, because the contrast between you couldn't see a single star and sun because it was no small storm. It was an interestingly poetic way of putting the whole thing. But all hope was gone. He's describing the scene, and anybody reading this would say, "Oh man, these people are done for. They're lost. There is no hope. There is no hope." Which is interesting too, that he uses that word about hope, all hope being gone, when that was so much a part of Paul's defense, was it not? That his, I keep hitting things. His defense again and again was that he was just following the hope that the Pharisees had, the hope of this resurrection, which was the resurrection of the people of Israel. But Paul changes that a little bit. No one had eaten for a long time. Finally, Paul called the crew together and said, "Men, you should have listened to me in the first place and not left Crete. You would have avoided all this damage and loss." Pause. Now, yeah, we can read that as Paul saying, "I told you so. I told you so." But we should read it that way. We should read it as Paul just kind of reminding them to emphasize, uh, you know, maybe you can listen to me now. Maybe you can listen to me now. It's not an "I told you so." But take courage. There's all this hopelessness. But take courage. None of you will lose your lives, even though the ship will go down. For last night an angel of the God to whom I belong, and whom I serve, stood beside me, and he said, "Don't be afraid, Paul, for you will surely stand trial before Caesar. What's more, God in his goodness has granted safety to everyone sailing with you. So take courage, for I believe God. It will be just as he said, but we will be shipwrecked on an island." Pause. So Paul has said, Paul's earlier prediction, which not a prophecy, but his own personal prediction, perhaps based on personal experience. If we stay here, we're not going to lose anything. Okay. Now he's saying he's got this. Now it's a prophecy. Now it's a message from God. Yeah, you lost your cargo. We're going to lose the ship, but every one of you is going to be safe. Every one of you is going to be safe. That's new because Paul had said earlier, if you leave, you're putting everybody in danger and people are going to lose their lives. Now Paul's saying everybody's going to be fine. As long as you listen to me now. As long as you listen to me now. Continuing, about midnight on the 14th night of the storm, as we were being driven across the Sea of Adria, the sailors sensed land was near. Maybe they heard it crashing against the rocks, which is quite possible. And they're drawing near to Malta. They dropped a weighted line and found that the water was 120 feet deep. But a little later, they measured it again and found it was only 90 feet deep. At this rate, they were afraid we would soon be driven against the rocks along the shore. So they threw out 4 anchors from the back of the ship and prayed for daylight. Pause. So they're being driven from the back, right? The wind is coming from the northeast or easternly at this point, perhaps, and they're being driven in this direction. So they're throwing the anchors off the back end of the ship for good reason. That's going to help keep the ship going straight. The back will be kind of locked in. The front can go a little bit, but not much. It's gonna mostly stay straight. If they threw the anchors in off the front of the ship to try to slow it, what would happen is the ship could completely swing sideways, which would not be good. The wind would be coming flat at them. So they were good in what they were choosing to do. The sailors made the right choice. They threw it off the back to keep the ship going as straight as possible, because they didn't want the wind coming at them sideways. Then the sailors tried to abandon the ship. They lowered the lifeboat as though they were going to put out anchors from the front of the ship, which they weren't going to do. But Paul said to the commanding officer and the soldiers, "You will all die unless the sailors stay aboard." So the soldiers cut the ropes to the lifeboat and let it drift away. Pause. And you could probably read Paul's words in a couple different ways, but I would say that Paul also was expressing concern for the sailors who were trying to get away, that he wanted to see them saved as well. Luke repeatedly makes repeated use of the Greek word sozo, meaning save or salvation. So it's one of those words where we get the so there is that double meaning to it as well. He is concerned about them being saved, and he's concerned about them being saved. And he says, if you let them get away, well, you guys are out of luck yourselves, because no one else here. They're your best chance of keeping this above ground and afloat as long as possible. But also, they're going to die if they're not here with us and with me. Again, prophet like Jesus. Just as day was dawning, Paul urged everyone to eat. "You have been so worried that you haven't touched food for 2 weeks," he said. "Please eat something now for your own good, for not a hair of your heads will perish." Then he took some bread, gave thanks to God before them all, and broke off a piece and ate it. Then everyone was encouraged and began to eat. All 276 of us who were on board. After eating, the crew lightened the ship further by throwing the cargo of wheat overboard. Pause. A few different things to talk about in this passage. Luke is very specific. Yes, he's kind of following. He is following the pattern. We might almost say the liturgy of the Eucharist, of communion, of Holy Communion, of the Last Supper, with what Paul does and what he says. He took bread, gave thanks to God, broke off a piece, and ate it. But we should not read that so literally that Paul is having communion, having Eucharist, because he would not have been doing that. He would not have Eucharist with pagans, which many of those Roman soldiers and sailors, etc., were. So it's not they're not having communion, they're not having Last Supper. But we could understand Luke's point of putting that in there in that particular way, in saying that in the same way that the Eucharist, that communion, that the Last Supper saves you and it nourishes you and fills you, is how this meal that Paul is sharing with these other people on board the ship will lead to their being saved. Okay? So, and yes, it is to, once again, prophet like Jesus, prophet like Jesus, prophet like Jesus. So it's not literally the Eucharist, but in some ways it shares some of the elements, and it does have that idea of being saved, of salvation in one or the other of its forms. Okay? And it's, my translation says 276 people were on board, and many of your translations will probably say that as well. Some documents, some manuscripts actually say 76. 76 is actually probably more realistic for the size of the ship that might have been there. However, 276 might have been on board. Don't get caught up in some of those kind of details. It's easy to see how things got changed as they were written down and stuff like that. And now the last thing that they can throw overboard. This is our last chance. This is our last day. But if we can lighten the ship even a little bit more, there's that much more chance of us getting past any reefs or shoals or sandbars and making it to land. They've gotten rid of cargo, which was the first thing to go because they didn't need it. They got rid of the ship's gear, tackle, because there was still a chance, but when they figured, let's get rid of that, now the last thing they're doing is, it says getting rid of wheat, so they're getting rid of food. They're getting rid of food. They're getting rid of anything else that's, throw over anything that's not tied down. They're getting rid of everything they can just to lighten that ship even a little bit more. Continuing, when morning dawned, they didn't recognize the coastline, but they saw a bay with a beach and wondered if they could get to shore by running the ship aground. So they cut off the anchors and left them in the sea. Then they lowered the rudders, raised the foresail, and headed toward shore. But they hit a shoal and ran the ship aground too soon. The bow of the ship stuck fast, while the stern was repeatedly smashed by the force of the waves and began to break apart. Pause. So see what they did. They released the rudders. The rudders were being held in place. This was a ship that had rudders and stuff like that, and there was no need to. They weren't going to be able to control it. Now, if they can even steer the ship a little bit, we can get it closer to shore. Maybe we can make it all the way and run her aground. And so that was what they did there, and they even added a sail, the foresail, to try to catch some more wind, to try to get to try to be able to control and steer the ship a little bit. But they hit a shoal too early, and they hit it so hard and so fast that the front got stuck. And the back end is swinging wildly and being smashed by the waves, smashed by the wind. Okay, and it's breaking apart. The soldiers wanted to kill the prisoners to make sure they didn't swim ashore and escape. But the commanding officer wanted to spare Paul, so he didn't let them carry out their plan. Then he ordered all who could swim to jump overboard first and make for land. The others held on to planks or debris from the broken ship, so everyone escaped safely to shore. Everyone escaped safely to shore. End chapter 27. So earlier it was the sailors who were trying to abandon ship and leave everybody and let everybody else die, and now it's the soldiers who are willing to kill the prisoners and I guess increase, thinking that might increase their chances. Although there's no lifeboat or anything to get on, so why bother? But Julius is concerned about Paul. Maybe he's taken a shine to Paul and likes him. We can think about it that way. Or, and this is probably more likely, he knows that he's a Roman citizen. And man, you know what? Just in case I get out of this, I don't want to have to say that Paul got killed. That I let soldiers kill Paul, who was a Roman citizen. You know, so he's taking his job seriously. I got to get this guy to Rome. Whew. So that ends it. They make it to land safely. Oh no, what's going to happen next? Well, we've only got one chapter left, so we better get to the denouement soon. And we will. We'll find out tomorrow what's the rest of the story. Well, friends, I do pray that these words have been beneficial to you, that you've found this spending of your time with me beneficial, and that God has spoken to you through what I have had to say. And once again, keep your spiritual eyes and ears open for God's actions and God's saving actions, miraculous actions, loving actions, grace-filled actions in your life and in the life of those around you. And when you see it, thank God and tell others. So until tomorrow, until we meet again, have a blessed day. Bye.